Well, the virus has now killed more than 100 people in China, and new cases have been confirmed around the world.
So you don't want to frighten the American public.
France and South Korea have also got evacuation plans.
But you need to prepare for and assume
strongly warning Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China.
That this is going to be a real serious problem.
France, Australia, Canada, the US, Singapore, Cambodia, Vietnam, the list goes on.
Health officials are investigating more than 100 possible cases in the US.
Germany, a man has contracted the virus.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
Japan, where a bus driver contracted the virus.
Coronavirus has killed more than 100 people there and infected more than 4,500.
We have to prepare for the worst, always, because if you don't and the worst happens.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
It's Tuesday, the 7th of April, the year of our Lord 2020. Welcome back to War Room Pandemic. We are hard across the street from the Supreme Court on Capitol Hill, right next to the plaza where our nation's capital is in Washington, D.C. It's episode 106 now with over 5.4 million downloads, one of the top podcasts in the nation and the world. Also live on the John Fredericks Radio Network on America's Voice.News, the streaming service of the Trump Revolution, Dish Channel 219, Newsmax TV now in 70 million homes, FM 99.1 and 103.9 in Chicago and throughout the world. Remember, later in the day, it'll be subtitled in Mandarin and blown through the firewall to all the VPNs. So the folks in China, hardworking men and women in China, we do our radio-free China every day. Also, with Nexus IRS throughout the world to 250 million English-speaking people on shortwave, midwave, and AM radio from everywhere from Latin America, the Middle East, Russia, India, and all parts in between. Okay, now we're going to go to London. A great, we got some
just
breaking news.
Breaking news. The New York Times is reporting that Kayleigh McEnany is going to be moving from the campaign to be the White House press secretary.
Oh, fantastic. She's a huge piece of manpower. Fantastic. She did such a great job. She's over at the RNC, did a great job, went to the campaign, did a great job. She's another fighter. So some moves over in the White House today. Jack Maxey, Raheem Kassam, Jason Miller, all of us, the whole War Room team here, plus Greg Manns and the folks manning the engine room. We're going to go now to London. In one of the top think tanks, and really the special partnership between the United States and the United Kingdom, the Henry Jackson Society, Dr. Alan Mendoza, and they wrote, I think, a think piece that's going to become very quoted. What we call CCP virus, they call it the coronavirus compensation. And this starts to lay out the intellectual architecture for exactly who's culpable, why they're culpable, and particularly using English common law. Who's going to be responsible, who's going to be held accountable, and who's going to pay for it. If you're at home right now and you don't have a paycheck, and if you're listening to us for the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, the $380 billion, if you look at this $2.3 trillion bridge, because that's what it is, just a bridge to the chasm. Every day we talk about how you get your money, what the economic crisis is, what the capital markets. If you're sitting there with a pension fund, the CalPERS has lost $68 billion in the last couple of weeks. The world's equity markets, public and private, throughout the world have lost over $20 trillion. If you're sitting there with no pension fund, zero interest rates, getting nothing in your checking account, it's all the responsibility of the Chinese Communist Party. And you now have people at very serious think tanks like the Henry Jackson Society and people like Dr. Alan Mendoza that are doing the intellectual architecture right now for how the entire world is going to hold these criminals accountable. I will now turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Raheem Kassam, who used to be one of the people over at Henry Jackson. Correct?
That's right. Alan, my old boss, Alan, who I'm sure is happy to have handed me off to you.
God, Alan, God bless you. I know how tough that is.
Yes, Alan, why don't you walk us through this? Alan, walk us through this report. You guys pulled this together very quickly, and credit to you guys and all the team at the Henry Jackson Society for doing so. This is a serious piece of work, and I knew that from the second you sent this to me, and the second this came out. Big spreads in the best and biggest British newspapers on this. The Daily Mail, obviously, covering it to a great extent. Tell us about the report, the origins, and the conclusions.
Well, I'm pleased to say that indeed it's gone across the UK press and indeed internationally had coverage across the world. I think the reason it's been covered is it's a very interesting idea. We, a couple of weeks ago, were talking about how we can make a real impact on the international debate around coronavirus. And it occurred to us that not enough attention was being paid to the early start of the virus and how it was able to spread from a very localized outbreak in Wuhan, in Hubei province, firstly across China and then, of course, internationally. And it seems to us there was a very basic principle at play here, which is whether you subscribe to the belief that China has deliberately done this or has been negligent or suppressed information, whatever the phrase is, whichever theory you come up with, we all know by now that China hid information. If China hid information about it, that's part of the reason this has been allowed to spread from a local infection to a global pandemic. And if that's the case, there has to be a way to investigate whether it's possible to take that up. For example, if you're a restaurant, you poison your customers accidentally, of course, you still have to pay compensation of some kind to those customers. The same is true if a company polluts accidentally or on purpose. There's going to be some payback for it. The principle doesn't change, even though we're dealing with an international situation. And so what we wanted to do was, if you like, create the timeline why we believe hid information negligent to start with, and then extrapolate that forwards into legal methodologies, how states or individuals might be able to claim compensation, with a view, obviously, for that being taken forward.
So tell me, how do you, the study you lay it out, how are you going to turn this into an action plan? You've laid out the argument quite compelling. It's on our site. We're going to tweet it back out today. We're going to push this nonstop because it's a great primer. But Dr. Mendoza, how do you take it to the next level?
Well, what needs to happen is, if you look at the legal remedies section, we put forward 10 possible ideas, some which are more realistic than others. So, for example, going to the Chinese courts is a possibility, but let's be frank, it's unlikely to yield positive action. But if you look at class action suits possibilities in the US, where individuals or groups can bring action, seen those be enacted in the past, we've also looked at a whole selection of international methods where governments can take. For a government to take action, of course, that requires the government to take. I tell you,
Dr. Mendoza, we're gonna need to hook that up.
Yeah, this line, Alan, if you can hear us, the line's choppy, but I'll go through it and we'll try and reconnect at some point.
Let's try to reconnect.
We'll just go through some of the things he was talking about here, using international law, international health regulations, the International Court of Justice on this, trying to somehow bring the World Trade Organization to heel and into line to do the job it was supposed to do, bilateral investment treaties. And of course, we know the Henry Jackson Society, named after Scoop Jackson, the US senator who was responsible for the Jackson-Vanik legislation. And the Jackson-Vanik legislation effectively made it so that Soviet Union era countries that were restrictive in terms of people who could leave their countries and restrictive in terms of how they treated their population, restrictive over how their markets operated, were not treated at the same level as free market economies that got on well with Western countries and that were part of, Western civilization. And that's what we're looking at here. China doesn't behave like the rest of us. We shouldn't treat it like the rest of us.
Scoop Jackson was a great ally of President Reagan in bringing down the Soviet Union. This is what the Henry Jackson Society was set up originally. It was about anti-communism, right? Henry Jackson was a Democrat, but he was an anti-communist Democrat. Like Daniel Patrick Moynihan, do we have Mara Moynihan on here? And nobody beats down the CCP like Mara Moynihan does, right? She makes my screed yesterday look like nothing. We're going to get Dr. Mendoza later in the week when we get a better connection. Look, we're doing this. I actually think our connections are better than the mainstream media when they come up. So, but the President of the United States,
literally, Steve,
is he listening to the show?
It might be right when you're introducing Dr. Mendoza. Literally, at the second you were doing it, President Trump tweets out, "The WHO really blew it. For some reason, funded largely by the United States, yet very China-centric. We will be giving that a good look. Fortunately, I rejected their advice on keeping our borders open to China early on. Why did they give us such a faulty recommendation?"
Okay, with the WHO and its brother Jack Maxey that dug this up the day it happened, I remember it was the same day they were signing the document in the East Room of the White House. I think it was 14 January. Dr. Ted in the WHO came out and said, after consultation with the Chinese Communist Party, the senior health officials, in all of that, in the thing. They have not seen any human-to-human transmission. That is a stone-cold lie. The reason you're at home right now and not at work, the reason your pension fund is zero, the reason you don't have a job, the reason your kids are not going to have a job, the reason that there are 10,000 dead in the United States, the reason we have more dead in New York City than in 9/11, 100% goes back to the Chinese Communist Party. The Henry Jackson Society and Dr. Mendoza is the first. We have many on there. People are starting to take real serious intellectual undertakings of looking at this. The President of the United States just points back to and people say it should be the Chinese Health Organization. Talk about Dr. Ted, what a bad hombre this guy is.
Listen, Tedros is a member of the Maoist Party of Ethiopia, so it doesn't take a lot of calculus to figure out which person he's concerned with. It's going to be Chairman Xi, not President Trump, not the Western leaders, not the Western world. The other thing that Dave Ramaswamy had many interactions with this guy. He's had some other bad. He's had a bad run. This has been proven in many sources. When Tedros was the health minister of Ethiopia, Tedros has been accused by numerous organizations, including U.S. doctors who wrote letters to the World Health Organization opposing his appointment, that he had covered up cholera epidemics in both southern Sudan and in Ethiopia that caused the deaths of hundreds, maybe thousands of people. Now, Tedros is not a good guy. That's clear. Now, one thing that also is very frightening, and it shows our listeners the dangerous and insidious nature of the CCP and its control of these NGOs. Taiwan, Free China, is not allowed to be a member of the World Health Organization, but we know because the Free China, Taiwan's foreign ministry, put out a statement over a week ago saying that they directly contacted the World Health Organization diplomatically with clinical proof that the virus was communicable human to human on December 31st, 2019.
When the entire story comes out, remember that date and remember the Republic of China, Free China, an ally of the United States that we don't treat well enough, but under President Trump, we're treating much better. The Free Chinese, and I keep saying, the Chinese people are among the most decent, hardworking. If you combine the Chinese people with English common law, like in Hong Kong and in Taiwan and in Singapore or the United States, there's nothing can stop them. They're fantastic. But it's English common law, and not the dictatorship that's in mainland China. And they notified the WHO, and their CDC is as good as you get. Because they know about SARS. And look at what they've done so far in this. Look at what they've done in this pandemic. Compare Taiwan, compare the Republic of China to anybody in the world of how they've handled this. They're the professionals. They notified Tedros on the 29th or 30th.
31st of December.
On New Year's Eve, that there was human-to-human transmission. This human-to-human transmission is the key. Okay? If in the biological Chernobyl that has now helped destroy the world, if they had just admitted it was human-to-human transmission and done the necessary steps, the poor people of Wuhan would not have been destroyed. Hubei province would not have all the destruction that human costs. And by the way, there's not 2,000. There's tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dead in China. And not just that, the ones that survived, right, given the rudimentary treatment they had over there, are in horrible physical shape. So this is all the chickens are coming home to roost on this, and we're going to be relentless. Okay, we're trying to get to we didn't have a great connection with Dr. Mendoza. I want to get him back on later in the week. Henry Jackson side, and these guys are going to be relentless, and they're also going to be on point in the UK. We've got Curtis Ellis. We're going to do him in the next segment. Curtis Ellis, as you know, is the trade guy and along with Peter Navarro, but he knows China. That's why he got involved in trade in this American Jobs Alliance. But he's got another piece up on WorldNet Daily, Joe Farr's great site, about the CCP as a criminal organization. Hey, Henry Kissinger, you've been taking money from equivalent of the mafia, okay? You're a running dog for the CCP, governor of Colorado. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back with Curtis Ellis, the entire team. Also, Jeremiah O'Keefe, used to be the Net Assessment Group over the Pentagon. We'll return under Andy Marshall, and he's going to do another beat down on the CCP about their culpability. Back in a second.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, we have Curtis Ellis and then Jeremiah O'Keefe. Jeremiah used to work with the Net Assessment Group over the Pentagon under the legendary Andy Marshall. Andy Marshall is one of the key architects of the war plan of President Reagan to bring down the evil empire. So these guys are another set of huge professionals. If you know anything about the war against the Soviets, if you ever read Peter Schweitzer's book, you understand the importance of Andy Marshall. Andy just passed away. I think he was 95 years old. We used to consult with him all the time about China and about the war against the Chinese Communist Party, which he was a huge advocate of. In fact, Dr. Bradley Thayer, his book was actually published under the auspices of a funding from Andy Marshall. He thought Thayer was so important to get out there. I want to go back in a second because this is so important. You're starting to see all the pieces are starting to come together. The World Health Organization. The guys have blown this from day one. Remember, we called this thing a pandemic back in January, I think the second or third week of January. The World Health Organization didn't call it a pandemic, Jack, 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago?
Yes.
They did not call it a pandemic because they tried to downplay this so that their financiers, the Chinese Communist Party, didn't look bad. That's just, she did not want this called a pandemic at all. They never wanted to refer to it as a pandemic.
And on a comparison, in 2009 with the H1N1 out of Mexico, I believe they called it a pandemic in, say, week 2 or 3.
Yes. So let's go. What did President Trump say about the WHO?
Yeah, so President Trump, continuing to hurl lightning bolts from Mount Olympus here, says the WHO really blew it for some reason, funded largely by the United States, yet very China-centric. We will be giving that a good look. Fortunately, I rejected their advice on keeping our borders open to China early on. Why did they give us such a faulty recommendation?
This is this whole thing on Axios and in the Maggie Haberman piece on Peter Navarro's memo is that, remember, the president took incredibly hard decisions. He shut all flights. He shut basically all flights, everything in from China, right? Number two, which people don't talk about, he quarantined people right away, had not been done in 50 or 60 years. Joe Biden, Sleepy Joe, when the president made that tough call, Biden called him a xenophobe, a racist, a nativist. This is just more the walled city, right, according to the governor of Colorado. Right, and that bought his time. He also authorized. Remember, they changed the whole protocol inside of nursing homes, and he authorized the CDC to get up to stand up the testing program. Now, it turns out in the administrative state that is the CDC, they blew it. Let's be honest, they blew it on the testing device. It was good old Dr. Hatfield in the first couple of days of the show said, "Hey, I think this thing's kind of complicated. It's more art than science. You know, you have a extraction thing, and you have a reagent you got to use, and you got to ship it back to Atlanta because it's so complicated." It didn't sound like something was going to work at the time, and it didn't work. But the president authorized stand the program up immediately. All the bold moves, right? And people are going to legitimately question, hey, this thing, boom, boom, boom. But when the Navarro memo was written, and up until that time, and look, I think it was Mulvaney as the chief of staff didn't have a meeting on this, at least in the public record, until the 27th of January. The other people like Navarro and Pottinger and these guys were trying to get the warning signs up, and action was taken. And let's be brutally frank. According to, I think, Vanity Fair, I don't know if somebody's got it up, but Dr. Fauci's just caught in a bald-faced lie. Okay, I'm not on the right wing beating Fauci for being the deep state or anything like that. We've tried to be. What we're saying, we need more precision out of the scientists. We need more data out of the scientists. We need more science out of the scientists, and not all kind of generalizations floating around. Right? He's a floater. Number one, he did not advocate for the shutting down of flights to China. He took the party line of WHO. Remember, the consensus among that community is you never stop flights in from countries because that will freak the countries out and they will start to lie about what's really the numbers, and therefore you'll have more spread. That's a theory. That's what Fauci argued at the time. Fauci did not argue. And he's quoted, and I know from other people that are calling me saying Fauci's given them on the record quotes that says he was the leading advocate. Dr. Fauci, I hate to say that's a stone cold lie. It was Peter Navarro and Pottinger, The China hands. And what's that quote? The anonymous quote in the Axios piece from a senior White House administration official. Oh, we just thought this was Navarro's crazy anti-China thing. Remember? They all revert back. That, oh, this is the crazy China nut crowd. This is Pottinger and Bannon and Navarro and all the whack jobs that are anti-CCP. No, this was just logic. And Fauci was taking the World Health Organization's party line, which is you never stop boards. Go ahead.
Yeah, the March 31st Vanity Fair interview that Fauci gave to Gabe Sherman, he's quoted in this saying, oh, yeah, I mean, with the travel that's going on, I think that's the thing that spurred me to make a strong recommendation to the president that we block any travel from China, because it was very clear that's where it emerged.
Okay, Jim Acosta, all the, every time the Oracle, Dr. Fauci, can somebody ask him a question about that? Did you actually, are you saying you actually supported the recommendation to block air travel from China? That's just not correct. People at the table know that. It's actually not correct. It's the reason that
actually he's not even saying he supported it. He's saying he promulgated the idea.
Yes. Dr. Fauci.
Yeah, this spurred me to make a strong recommendation to the president that we block any travel from China.
No, that's not true.
And keep in mind, Steve, what interview happened on January 26th?
Oh, okay, yes, exactly. This is even better. Now let's go back. January 26th on WABC, John Katsimatidis had the interview with Dr. Fauci. At my recommendation, because we had already started war and pandemic, and Katz follows us closely and says, what are you doing this pandemic thing for? And of course, my hair's on fire. It's the biggest thing in event in human history. So he has Fauci on because Katz was a big supporter of the Clintons back in the 90s, Clinton administration, and knew Fauci from that time. Fauci comes on, not just rains on the plate, is totally dismissive. The Hill newspaper, the headline Sunday morning, because they got it on Saturday, the headline Sunday morning, U.S. official says America has nothing to worry about, right?
Yeah, let's go to the clip.
Be with you. What can you tell the American people about what's going on? Should they be scared?
I don't think so. The American people should not be worried or frightened by this. It's a very, very low risk to the United States, but it's something that we as public health officials need to take very seriously. This is a virus that has emerged and jumped species from an animal reservoir.
Okay, we're not asking Dr. Fauci, no need to come on the show because there would be police tape. It's a big crime scene investigation. We would just ask you the tough questions that none of the media wants to ask you. And this is the problem with Anderson Cooper and Chris Cuomo and all the Rachel Maddow crowd and everybody, Brian Williams, you're all holding up the oracle of Dr. Fauci. This is not a right-wing attack on Fauci to say, hey, he's deep state. I want him to be a scientist. I want him to put up data. But I also don't want him to lie straight face. He moves the goalpost all the time. He never talks. Here's the question you got to ask me today. What is your model? What metrics every morning do you talk to the President of the United States about the 2 or 3 most important metrics? Your plan on April 30th, because it's 30 days, and you expanded the 30 days, right? The 30 days with the Corona Task Force, which you're the senior scientist. What are the metrics you said that we can open up? We have to get specific with Dr. Fauci, because as a country, as an economy, as a people, we cannot go down this and just kind of lollygag and wander around. And he's a wanderer. It's a different, highfalutin statement every day. He must, and it's incumbent upon the media, instead of asking snarky questions to the President of the United States, you don't have to be snarky with Dr. Fauci. He's a good man. Okay? But what you should do is start to hold him accountable. And Dr. Birx should be held accountable. If they're going to play scientist on TV, let's get the science. Let's get the data.
And again, here's why it matters. We have to know.
We being unfair?
No, because here's the deal. We all want to open up the economy as fast as possible. We all want to save the maximum amount of American lives. We all agree on this. What we have to make sure is that the recommendations being made to President Trump follow some kind of metrics-based outcome with specific outcomes based on specific behavioral actions and policy procedures that are put into place so we know the go-forward path. What is going to be recommended after the 30 days to save America? How is this going to bring it down? How can we start to open up the economy? These are all things that have to be measurable as they're being enacted.
This is not brain surgery, okay? And we've basically, and we have what we have the right science team. We have NIH. We have CDC. They're the best in the world. What they have to do, I think, is start putting this forward. Do we have time? I want to bring in Curtis. And Curtis, we're going to have to bring you back over the segment. I apologize. I was on another rant. Instead of CCP, I'm on my Dr. Fauci rant. We're trying to make Dr. Fauci, we're trying to make sure that he's as great as possible, right? He is the oracle. We want you to be the oracle, Dr. Fauci. Curtis, real quickly, tee it up and we'll bring you back over the break. What's the title of your piece on WorldNet Daily?
The Chinese Communist Party is a criminal organization masquerading as a legitimate government. You look at how they behave as well as what they say, and that explains the headline. Look at what they do, and you'll see they're behaving as a criminal organization, not a government.
Tell me why do you say they're
Yeah. But let me just say thank you.
Why are they a criminal organization?
Jackson. Henry Jackson and the Jackson-Vanik Amendment separated the legitimate governments from the illegitimate governments. And the Chinese Communist Party, number one, it hid the virus. No public health professional would tell a doctor you can't report a disease. That's what they did. That breaks the rules that we live by. Then they deliberately misled the world, as you've been talking about with the World Health Organization, lying to the World Health Organization. These international organizations are supposed to be helping the world, but if they're being lied to and manipulated, they can't perform their legitimate function. And then it went around it refused to provide the biological samples so we can develop a serological test and develop the other tests, and so that we knew what was going on.
Hey, Curtis, we're going to take a short commercial break. We're going to return with you in a second. Curtis Ellis is going to return. Chinese Communist Party is a criminal organization. War Room Pandemic. The team will be back from the War Room in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
We have a new missive from the State Department. Let us. Are we ready to go with it?
I'm ready to go with it. Morgan Ortagus, who's the State Department spokeswoman, this morning putting out a tweet following an op-ed by the Chinese ambassador to the United States, which is headline, China and the U.S. must cooperate against the coronavirus. The first part of the statement, not necessarily important. The second part, actually more along our lines. Okay, so Morgan Ortagus tweeting this morning, the U.S. welcomes China's call to combat the COVID-19 pandemic together. Whatever. Then, quote, we urge Beijing to share all virus data, let international teams investigate how the outbreak began in China, and allow citizens free speech. True cooperation requires transparency and real actions, not just rhetoric.
Firewall has to come down for the people of China. For the hardworking, decent folks in China, we need the firewall to come down. They need to be able to communicate with the outside, and I'm glad that Mike Pompeo and the folks over the State Department understand President Trump and Pompeo have to deal on a government-to-government basis. Hey, we were allies with Joseph Stalin. FDR had to deal with Stalin in World War II, right? You got to deal with, you got to deal with bad guys all the time, and they're doing it at an appropriate level at that. Doesn't mean that we can't attack relentlessly that they're a criminal organization and all of their supporters, all their collaborators. Yes, I went there. They're collaborators here in the United States, on Wall Street, in government, right? Susan Thornton, a person we ran out of the government. She was a collaborator. If she didn't like it, I could care less. Up at Yale, complete scumbag. All of you folks that collaborated with these folks for decades and decades and decades, you're all getting outed. Okay, it's all going to come out. Just understand, it's all going to come out. And you can write all the op-eds in the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times. You can come on all the talk shows. You can be on Morning Joe all you want. It's all coming out. Okay, I want to turn now back to... You got something to add on that, John?
I just wanted to say, we're talking about the firewall. This is one of the reasons why Huawei and their 5G network is so important for the West to be on top of, because that's really their way of creating a reverse firewall on us. You know what I'm saying? Their ability to monitor every single communication in the West. And it's a huge threat, and I hope this is waking people up to that.
But this is, by the way, American technology is also supporting the firewall. American companies today are getting paid for what efforts they're doing on the firewall. I want to bring back now Curtis Ellis, Curtis Ellis from the American Jobs Alliance has been fighting for American working men and women for decades and decades and decades, one of the chief architects with Peter Navarro, the president's trade policies, and he knows China as well as anybody. He's got a new piece up, the CCP as a criminal organization. So, Curtis, just real briefly, walk us through the 2 or 3 things of why they're a criminal organization and not a legitimate government.
Well, as the State Department just pointed out, they hid crucial information. To this day, they refuse to share the basic public health data, the basic biological information we need to fight this. Then they went around the world and bought up the world's supplies of epidemic control equipment, of medical gear and things like that the world would need to confront, to deal with this. And now they're selling that information. Now they're selling those goods back to the countries they infected. This is like the mob torpedo that walks up and says, "That's a really nice store you have there. I'd hate to see something bad happen to it. And just give me some money and I'll make sure nobody throws a brick through your window." I mean, that's essentially what they're doing. They're hiding, they're lying, and they're using this protective gear to buy chits, to buy propaganda victories, to get Governor Cuomo to say nice things about them when they actually created the problem in the first place. And that's without even going into what they're doing to the Muslims in Xinjiang, what they're doing to the protesters in Hong Kong. They are behaving like, not behaving like, they are a thug regime. This is a gangster organization that's oppressing the people of China and trying to impose their will on the rest of the world. Look at what they say to anybody who speaks out against them at the NBA. If you just speak up, it's like you've got to say what we tell you to say. Otherwise, we're not going to let you do business here. That's not the way we do business in the West, and we shouldn't be treating them as if they are just like us, because they're not just like us.
To show you that what a criminal organization, they've got Bruno Wu, who's one of the intelligence assets, and a bag man for delivering money here in the United States. Bruno Wu, one of the worst people in the world. He's the head of the committee that's working with the state of New York and the tri-state area. They've got some committee of the Chinese Benevolent Society or one of these fake false front groups like the Soviets used to have. He's the guy that's the Dr. Bruno Wu is the guy that's working with the basically the politicians in New York to kind of get Jack Ma, who's a member of the CCP, Tsai, the owner of things, CCP. There's all Chinese Communist Party. And what they've done, this is why I said in the New York Post the other day, the story, it's premeditated murder. They knew back in December that this had human-to-human transmission, and they withheld it from the world, just like the Soviets withheld Chernobyl, because they didn't want to get blamed for it. They thought they could tamp it down. They sacrificed Wuhan. But when it got so big, they finally had to admit it. In that time, when they knew they had human-to-human transmission and basically a pandemic, they vacuumed up all the PPE, all the personal protective equipment in Europe, in Brazil, and the United States. So when you have the heroes of this, the folks that cross the beach at Normandy, the doctor and nurses teams in the ICUs that need the PPE, are the reason you can't do more testing, as my brother Jack Maxey tells us, because you don't have enough protective equipment of the front line of the healthcare workers. All of their deaths are on the hands of the CCP. And here's the great thing about the Henry Jackson and guys like Curtis Ellis. The momentum in the intellectual infrastructure to hold them accountable is starting to be built, okay? Every person that dies, and particularly every doctor and nurse that dies, is going to have a lawyer, okay? Just like in 9/11, they're going to have a lawyer. And that lawyer is going to use English common law. Okay, what the United States is based upon. They're going to use English common law to go after these criminals. Just like Rudy put the 5 families away, we're going to put the mafia family away in China. Curtis, thank you so much. We're going to get all your social media up. We're going to get this up on the site. Another great article. Keep pounding. Curtis Ellis from the American Jobs Alliance. Thanks, brother, for joining us today.
America First policies. Don't forget America First policies. President Super PAC.
America First, the Super PAC, the Trump Super. He's the policy guy for the Trump Super PAC. Fat, huge piece of manpower.
He's talking about these guys vacuuming up these PPEs. There are numerous examples. One of the worst that I read about was in Australia, where a Chinese state-owned company, real estate company in in the north of Australia repurposed their entire Chinese staff to go out and play locusts for PPEs throughout Australia. They took 30 million, apparently, N95 masks out of Australia during the time that they knew Australia was going to need it. And while they're claiming that they have it all under control in China, this is like a crime against humanity, and it was totally premeditated.
It is a crime against humanity, and that's what I say. Eventually, write it down here. We're always get this right. There's going to be a Nuremberg-type trial. It's going to be held in Wuhan, and the free people of China, the citizens of Wuhan, the relatives of all those that were murdered in cold blood by the Chinese Communist Party, they're going to sit in judgment and represent the world, okay? And we're going to hold these guys in judgment, and it's going to be the free people of Wuhan that's the jury, okay? Your day's coming. That day's coming, and that day's not that far away. The world's going to unite and stand up. We cannot allow this criminal behavior. They will destroy the world and everything in it to keep power. Okay? They're the same type of gangsters. These aren't governments. The Soviet Union, they were gangsters. You saw that in Chernobyl. The Nazis are gangsters. The fascists are gangsters. The imperial guys in Germany, the Tojo and those guys are all gangsters. They're all gangsters. Stinger's got it right. Curtis Ellis got it right. They're gangsters. And they got to start being treated like gangsters. Okay?
And never forget, just like the Nazis, what we see historically is these totalitarian regimes do to their own people first what they are willing to do to you. We saw this with the heavy use of killing of the invalid and the people who had genetic abnormalities in Germany. This was years before the final solution. So the tell is how they treated Wuhan, because that's the best that they'll treat you.
The hardworking people of Wuhan had this visited upon them. They're the ones that faced the most brutal part of this.
See, and we don't even know the fullest extent of this siphoning off PPE from all around the world. We know about this 90 tons that came out of Australia. We know about this China-Switzerland connection group that commandeered PPE from Swiss suppliers in the beginning of all of this. And we know about the Bush Foundation, the George W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations, facilitating 2 million masks to be taken out from the United States and sent to China, right? And these are the people who have been leaders, by the way, in Western countries, facilitating China's vulture-like approach to this stuff. But think about how many we don't know about, who haven't publicized their work, who didn't put out press releases, who the paper trails haven't yet been identified. There's a lot more of this to come.
Completely hapless.
In Italy, there's a story that the Italians, just like all the other Western countries, donated tons of these supplies to the Chinese. There's a story out there that some of the supplies that have been sent back to Italy from China with a charge were actually masks that the Italians had already sent to China 2 months ago.
It's not the selling. That what they're doing is more insidious, is like in New York, where we're going to send you some masks, and then, you're in the governor, and Cuomo is on for a couple of days earlier saying, I didn't know everything was made in China. I said, dude, where have you been for the last 25 years? If you want to be president of the United States, you got to come across something better than a rube, because I look like a rube, and then 2 days later he's kowtowing to Jack Ma. Jack Ma's total CCP. Okay, 100%. He's a front. He's a Potemkin Village. He's a Potemkin Village guy. The guys that really built the company are back of him. He's running around like Michael Jackson, all the dances and the little story of the little school teacher. He's a clown. Total CCP is the way they roll. Now, Alibaba, they're in every one of your. Then you've got all your accounts. They've downloaded all your stuff. Forget it.
Hey, if you American kids who are at home, out of school, listening to our show, 85% of all of the toys on planet Earth are made in communist China. I want you to tell your mom and dad that this Christmas, this birthday, you don't want a commie toy.
Yeah, because this is what we're trying to do.
Jack, you would make a great Santa Claus. I do want to jump in real quick just on the topic of America First. Last week, we played that ad from Kathleen Wall, candidate down in Texas 22.
We got to get her
going hardcore on China. Jason Lewis, former congressman from Minnesota, running for the U.S. Senate, one of the real sleeper races, is now out with a 30-second ad going very strong. It seems this is going to be the future of 2020. Play this ad real quick.
Hey, Minnesota, we've been through a rough couple of weeks. But while you and I have been putting America first, too many politicians have been blocking economic relief, selling their stock, and outsourcing jobs to China. Heck, they won't even admit that's where the virus started. We need to buy American, put Minnesota first, and make certain this never, ever happens again. As your next senator, I'll do exactly that. I'm Jason Lewis, and I approve this message.
Our point in playing this, and we like Jason Lewis, he's been on the show, great patriot. The point of this, whether it's a Kathleen Wall, whether it's a Jason Lewis, next week when we come back, there'll be more candidates who are out talking like this.
It's defining.
This is defining. This will be the future of 2020. This will be every ad, not every ad. This will be so many of the ads that you see this fall.
And the left's got to understand, this is not racist. We're for the freedom of the Chinese people. I spend 80% of my time with freedom groups and broadcasting to free the Chinese people. It's the people in Wuhan, as Jack said, that bore the brunt of these criminals. It's the Chinese Communist Party. This is the CCP virus, not the Wuhan virus, not the China virus, not the Chinese virus. This is the Chinese Communist Party virus. These are criminals. They are monsters and they're financed by Wall Street and the City of London, and they got the corporatists in their pockets. Half of these think tanks, politicians all over. It's all going to get exposed. It's all coming out. And they're going to stand trial in Wuhan by the free citizens of Wuhan. And that's how they're going to meet their fate. I can't wait till the citizens of Wuhan get to vote on what they want to do to Xi and Wang Xishan and Bruno Wu and this whole collection of criminals. Take a short break. We're back with Jeremiah O'Keefe in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. I just heard, look, if they're going to blow up Kaylee, they got to blow up Fauci first. Dr. Fauci gave 2 interviews to Newsmax, our partners, our distribution partners, Newsmax TV, the great team with Chris Ruddy on the 21st of January. I think to Greg Kelly, right? The Greg Kelly interview. And then to John Katsimatidis on WABC. Another one of our distribution partners. 2 interviews on the 3rd week of January. Here's the reason I know it. Katz blew me up. He goes, hey, I thought you told me it's the biggest thing in the world. Fauci's the oracle. Fauci says nothing to worry about. Not coming to the United States. American people have nothing to worry about. And the Hill newspaper reported, where's the mainstream media and all that? Have I seen that on CNN? Have I seen that on MSNBC? Hey, Lawrence O'Donnell, you're such an oracle of truth. How come you don't have that up there? You know why? Because you're so partisan. Your hatred of Trump is so warped. And Brian Williams, that you can't talk about the truth. The country's in peril here. The country's in peril. How do we get through this? How do we get out of this? And you got to hold Dr. Fauci accountable. They're going to blow her up all day today. I'm sure they're going to play this Trish Reagan quote. But hey, listen, Fauci was saying the same thing at the same time. NIH, this was their official policy, okay? The official policy of NIH. At the same time, we're banging on the drum, biggest event in human history, coming out of Wuhan. They've locked down Hubei, size of France, the thing. Hey, we're just a bunch of nutcases over here. I got that. I'm with it. You know why? Because we knew eventually people were going to pay attention because we know China and we can kind of do some math. And we talked to the top experts in the world.
By the way, Kaylee's response, she said back to Alex Kaczynski from CNN now. Is the
investigative group.
Right, the investigative guy. He said, and I was...
The K-file.
Right.
The K-file. Hey, why don't you investigate... What K-file? Get on Fauci. His assignment. Simon Des.
By the way, why doesn't K-File investigate the CCP reporter who was in the White House press briefing room yesterday?
Bruno Wu used to own the company, CCP, Phoenix TV, total CCP owned.
Stick that in your K-File.
So here's what Kaylee said, and I was right. Dr. Fauci has said the travel restrictions on China were a very smart move and the right public health call. Dr. Fauci said there was no question there would be more U.S. cases if President Trump didn't take the action I defended and Biden criticized.
Unbelievable. The whole nest of lies and misrepresentations. Okay, now we're going to bring in Jeremiah O'Keefe. Jeremiah O'Keefe is a great American patriot, was with the Bush administration back during the Iraq War, also worked with a legendary figure, not particularly well known, but he should be. If you're free today, you owe it to Andy Marshall and the people at the Net Assessment Group back in the Pentagon back in the 1980s and 90s. He was one of the intellectual architects of President Trump's war to take down and destroy the evil empire, which President Reagan's effort to do that. Jeremiah now joins us. Jeremiah, first, the British, about this whole situation, about where this thing, the origin from, and we're not a bioweapons people here. We're not even a lab people. We're saying, hey, it's incumbent upon the Chinese Communist Party to put that information forward. But you actually were the guy that found the material that kind of started this whole thing. Can you walk us through exactly what's going on in the UK today and what you found and where we stand with this story?
Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, audience. What has happened in the last 24 hours is that the British government has acknowledged they are now open to the possibility that the virus came out of a lab in Wuhan instead of the wet market. All right? The nonsense that has been pushed by the Chinese government. I have the document here that the British now have, okay, that was written by 2 PhDs associated or attached to, I should say, to the University of South China Technology, okay? So the British now have this document. They've changed their position in the last 24 hours that this virus possibly came out of one of the 2 labs in Wuhan. So this is, God love him, as I understand it from my sources in the Middle East, the leading professor, Batanyo Shio, who has disappeared since he put this document out on a website called ResearchGate back in February 5th, I believe it is, okay, in which he and the other professors state that they believe, after their study, that the virus came out of one of the 2 labs in Wuhan. Not a bloody fish market or wet market or live animal market, but out of one of the 2 labs. Now, they talk about the fact that the virus comes from what are called horseshoe bats, which are several hundred miles away in another area of China in caves. There are 2 labs, as we know, in Wuhan, all right? The one that is of primary concern is the Virology Institute, which is about 7 miles or so from the wet market, as they call it. They cite in their document that they suspect, their conclusion was that staff people at one of the institutes, and it is the level 4 institute, we'll get into that in a moment, that were exposed through being urinated on, scratched, blood infections and all of that, who took that into the Wuhan area, be it the market. They also cite the first 40 or so individuals who were contaminated were at a medical facility next to the institute. All right? That's critical to know. So big picture.
Hey, Jeremiah, we're going to have you back on tomorrow. We're going to put this up on the site just so people understand. We're going to get Jeremiah O'Keefe back on tomorrow to pursue this. The British government's now taking this seriously. This is what Tom Cotton's been taking about. We're saying it's incumbent upon the Chinese Communist Party to put all this information out there. And what you're seeing is that maybe in working on a vaccine or working on this, it came out in the Wuhan area. And so, and by the way, people in China have been telling me from day one, the Chinese Communist Party has been pointing to that wet market to take the heat off them about these 2 labs, the Chinese CDC, which is a P2 lab, and the P4 lab that is in Wuhan. Jeremiah, thank you. We're going to put this up on the site. This was a peer-reviewed journal. They put it out for early comment. And then when it got so controversial, it came down and the 2 professors are missing. Jeremiah O'Keefe will join us back tomorrow. Thank you very much. Okay. War Room Pandemic will be back at 5 o'clock on WABC. So much breaking news while outside the President's press conference when we return. I want to thank you and make sure you go to #War Room